Ladies and gentlemen, Simon Watson, who Anthony referenced just before, the Managing Director of New Zealand Hothouse Limited, the country's leading privately owned specialist tomato grower and marketer. And he's worked there for the past 25 years. And Glynis McCarthy is a trainer and facilitator who's worked in the adult education sector for more than 20 years. And her work has included advising companies on training, delivery, design, and development. Engaging with a diverse workforce, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Simon Watson and Glynis McCarthy.
Thank you, Anthony, and I certainly do agree with Anthony Tringham that the public need to be reminded of where their food comes from. And a shout out to Countdown, well done with your latest ads. They are certainly reminding people of where their food comes from, very, very important. So engaging with a diverse workforce, mine's just a brief really introduction for Glynis's piece, and how we got on this subject as a company was through a workplace incident. Oops. Right, got it. So a workplace incident. So in July 2016, we had an incident in our pack house in Drury. It involved 2 contractors and a staff member being unnecessarily exposed to carbon monoxide. This occurred because we had not implemented a safe work system for using LPG forklifts or developed and authorised an adequate contractor management system. So in July 2017, 1 year later, we were formally charged and we were made aware of the options that we faced. Option 1 was work our way through the court system, and option 2 was apply for an enforceable undertaking, which we weren't really sure what that was, so I'll explain. The enforceable undertaking, formally, it's an enforceable undertaking is an enforcement pathway that is permitted under Part 4 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, which allows the duty holder to voluntarily enter into a binding agreement with WorkSafe. So less formally, what that is an EU is a way of ensuring improvements to health and safety in an organisation involved, in the wider sector, that's our industry, and in health and safety systems generally, where the benefits have a greater value than a prosecution. So usually an EU has to show benefit in 4 areas or 4 pillars. So obviously the victim is top of the list. Second is the entity responsible, that was us. Thirdly is the wider sector or industry, that's the horticulture industry. And finally, the community. And asking for an enforceable undertaking, it's not a given, so they turn down far more than they accept. And in 3 years since the operation of the new Act, there's only 24 have been allowed so far. But in those 24, there's $3.8 million worth of has been distributed back into the workplace in the form of training. It requires a considerable time commitment, a big focus, and obviously a lot of expense. But the upside is a far more safety conscious and an educated business. So specifically what we proposed in ours, and this was with the help of Glynis's team at Safety Associates, who are the authors of many of the successful enforceable undertakings. Obviously, top of the list was amendments to victims. Second was a paid safety or training day for all of our pack house staff. Thirdly was the execution of a half-day mock incident to test our systems, and that involved fire and ambulance first responders as well. We hosted an in-house safety day for all of our staff. We had an initial gap check from Talark for ISO 45001, and that is currently the most recognised health and safety system available internationally currently. We followed that up with applying for and obtaining our full ISO 45001 certificate. We had an article regarding the incident and the resulting EU written and published in Horticulture and the Orchardist. We created an internship, this is the one for the public good, from our local school, for a local school leaver to be trained as a health and safety professional, providing a pathway into the health and safety sector. And what Glynis is going to be talking to you about was the big set piece was the formal worker literacy and numeracy program that we've put through our business to ensure that our people are understanding our systems. And finally, obviously presenting the findings of that program here at the conference. In May 2018, we were advised that our EU had been accepted. It's quite a process. It's not an easy one, I might add, but it takes quite a while. So we've been implementing the proposal since then, and we expect to finish the commitments by November 2019. So these are just pictures from our safety training day, of which all of the staff are heavily involved. This is from our mock incident, and as we mentioned, the fire and the ambulance first responders very, very heavily involved. Very important for creating realism. WorkSafe specifically asked me to include this slide. It is an extract, obviously, from the Act. It's not an easy read. It's very typical of legislation. So on the next slide, I'm going to give it to you in a bit more plain English, or as we call it in the tomato industry, farmer speak. So, what does it mean? So up until the incident, our focus had very much been about keeping our staff and our direct employees safe in the workplace. But we'd clearly overlooked the very different dynamic that third-party contractors bring to the business. And we assume far too much of our contractors, many whom have served us for well over 30 years. So going forward, we are very, very clear that the safety of all workers on site, and that includes third parties, that we have engaged and are obviously directing to do work are absolutely our responsibility. So who is that? That's maintenance engineers, refrigeration engineers, fencing contractors. If you've engaged them and directed them to do a job, you are responsible for them. So just a snapshot. It's a very, very long list, the big list, but some of the big items or the key changes that we brought to the business as a result of the incident. Obviously, we had to make a fresh start, completely fresh start to our contractor systems, radically changing the way that we engaged and managed them at every level. There were parts of our factory and plant that we have had to extensively redesign and modify. The JSA, or Job Safety Analysis System, by way, has become a cornerstone of every maintenance activity. So that's prior to starting a job, we do a full analysis of the job and where the safety issues may lie. For major shutdowns or installations, we now employ observers, full-time observers, just watching, making sure nothing's going wrong, and they have the right to shut the place down if they feel something's unsafe. We now have daily startup or toolbox meetings, and the presence of obviously third-party maintenance contractors are a fixed agenda item. And our staff are now far more informed and engaged in that process. So today we host now an annual mock incident. It was originally part of the EU, just a one-off, but we do it every year now. And we actively test our systems to breaking point. We want to know where the weak points are so that we can get them covered before we have a live event. And during the ISO 45001 audit process, we discovered that our 3-year-old health and safety manual, which is the foundation of our system, was out of date, and there were some significant systems that had to be rewritten. So I urge you to relook at yours. So we know that we have a good system, we know that it makes good sense, but what the ISO 45001 audit showed us was that we still had to work a lot harder on ensuring that our people were not just engaged, but that they clearly understood the system. So the worker literacy and numeracy program that Glynis is going to talk about in just a few minutes is what we introduced to ensure that the key safety messages were hitting the mark and getting through. So our people are now far more engaged, more empowered post-incident. The trainings, programs and experiences are combined to give them the confidence to speak up, engage and question what's going on. And finally, our experience with WorkSafe, and in particular the enforceable undertaking team, has actually been a very positive and a supportive one, and we'd strongly recommend that process. So health and safety for us is a never-ending journey. You never arrive, never. It's just all the time evolving. So I'd like you to welcome Glynis. She's a principal of Safety Associates. They were a very, very important part of our defence team and have been guiding us through not just this process, but ongoing changes to our system.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you for Simon for leading into this. Really, the part of the presentation that I'd like to talk about is about one specific component of the EU that New Zealand Hothouse are looking at, and that's really looking and saying, how do you harness the potential of people? In my experience, both as an adult educator and particularly working in adult literacy, but also working as a health and safety consultant, I know that when I meet people that have had an accident, it is like they are born-again smokers. So they are the people that have given up smoking. And they can now smell smoke way past the northern part of the Bombay Hills. So they can smell when somebody has lit up. So you've got a group of people at Simon's workplace that have gone through an experience where somebody has been harmed. And what we're trying to do now with the literacy and numeracy program is to really look at what are the nuances that you need to inspire others. How do you get to a point where people don't have to experience harm themselves so that you can get to a really engaged workforce? So the program that Simon is looking at with his team, The program that Simon is looking at with his team is looking at a literacy and numeracy program, quite an intensive program. So why is he doing that? First off, really, what is workplace literacy? Well, workplace literacy is the ability to understand and respond appropriately to written text. Numeracy is the ability to use numerical and mathematical concepts in everyday working experiences. And problem solving and critical thinking, which I think are really the most important, are your capacity to access and interpret and analyse information. Now, the people that I have met at New Zealand Hothouse and KPH are all really lovely people. They want to come to work, they want to do the best that they can. They have a static workforce as well as a big influx of seasonal workers. How do you harness that information? How do you harness the knowledge that those core staff have built up so that you can get the whole team, whether it be seasonal workers, whether it be contractors, to really see safety in the same lens? Proficiency in information processing has become an increasingly important and necessary skill for participation in many aspects of complex work situations, such as education, training, and workplace skills. All of the tasks that Simon's team have working with him, they all rely on people having good literacy skills. Certainly your literacy skill proficiency will impact on the way that people can do their job, how they work with other people, and how quickly they learn and take on new skills. New Zealand participates in an OECD survey every 10 years. We've gone through 2 of them now. The last survey that we took part in that looked at literacy skills in New Zealand was around 2014-2015, where over 6,000 adults in New Zealand between 16 and 65 were surveyed. And good news for us in New Zealand, actually our literacy rates are increasing. We're doing better than the OECD average. New Zealand's skilled immigrants are actually more skilled than they are in other OECD countries, which is a good thing for us. But at the same time, our native-born New Zealanders who speak English as a second language are overrepresented among adults with low proficiency. Differences in skill proficiency relating to age, gender, education, social background are far less pronounced than they are in other OECD countries. However, we have sharp ethnic differences, particularly for Māori and Pacifica workers. So depending on your workforce, this sort of information tells us a lot about the skill set of those workers. In New Zealand, more so I think than in other OECD countries, having a high proficiency in literacy and numeracy has a positive impact on participation in the workforce and in wages. So tackling literacy issues in the workplace. One of the major tenets of the Health and Safety at Work Act is worker engagement. For workers to meaningfully engage in your health and safety system, they have to have strong language and literacy skills. What I know from my time in adult literacy was that for many people, the language of health and safety and the concepts of health and safety are obscure. I've met many an adult who have said to me when they've filled in an accident form where they had to identify had they been harmed in their upper trunk or say their lower trunk. I've met many an adult who have said to me in the past, but there wasn't an elephant involved. I've met many person who's had to identify were they harmed in their upper limb or their lower limb. Again, say to me, but there wasn't a tree involved. I banged into some shelving. So we need to really think about how do we message health and safety. And certainly where people have low levels of English language and low levels of literacy, they can create a barrier. So as part of the EU that Simon has just mentioned, there's a project that's running alongside the Workplace Literacy Program, and that's what I'm involved in. And it's looking to identify what type of literacy and numeracy and language interventions can make a measurable difference in the way that people engage with health and safety. Certainly before the program started, a number of workers reported that they felt nervous about speaking up. They felt nervous about participating in meetings. They weren't sure how to check whether or not one of their team members was competent in doing a task. They struggled filling in the health and safety documentation, and they struggled understanding some of the information that was given to them in written form. So the literacy program is really looking to see how can you build the core understanding of health and safety literacy, of language, of communication skills, and of leadership skills. And those are going to be staff from they are staff from the pack house. They include supervisors, 2 ICs, quality control staff, store staff. All of these personnel have a huge amount of engagement with people on the floor, whether they be visitors, contractors, or seasonal workers, or part of their existing team. And the program itself is looking to make sure that people have a core understanding in health and safety concepts so that they can identify hazards and risks in their jobs or tasks, that they can communicate fluidly, both formally and informally, when conditions change, that they have the appropriate language skills to express their thoughts and views on health and safety matters, that they can use active listening skills to listen and consider the views of others in their team, of other workers, of contractors and management, that they understand the risk strategies used at NZHH and KPH, and that they can participate in the health and safety systems by reporting near misses, incidents and accidents, and that the people who are doing this project will achieve a unit standard, which is 497, which is to demonstrate knowledge of workplace health and safety requirements. So to get this program started, what we did was we completed an assessment of the language, literacy and numeracy demands on site. We looked at the speaking, the reading, the writing, the numeracy, the problem solving, the critical thinking, the soft skills and the hard skills required to engage with health and safety. And what we did is we interviewed management. We asked of their perceptions. Where did they think that their staff did really well, and where were the areas that could be improved upon? Management then nominated 15 staff from KPH, and they were selected to participate in a literacy needs analysis. That needs analysis took materials from KPH NZ Hothouse and asked questions about it of the participants. It asked them to engage with safety alerts, with written instructions. It asked them to talk to us about how they deal with training issues, how they deal with poor performance, how they deal with situations when they think something isn't right. And we collated that information, and what we found was that 10 participants of those 15 really could benefit from going through and doing a 40-hour, 20-week literacy, language and numeracy training program. So what was identified? Well, what we identified was, of the people that we assessed, that there were definitely some gaps in their core literacy and numeracy knowledge. And although they are hard-working staff and valued employees, that these low levels of literacy can in fact prevent these staff from taking on new challenges and adapting quickly to new environments. And they can certainly limit the chances for people to be upskilled. So what did we find out? Well, what we found out was that for a lot of people, actually reading core health and safety documentation was a stretch too far. So what they really did is rely on their knowledge already. So that has a big impact if you're, say, trying to produce some new knowledge, something that people have to respond to quickly, because it takes time for that new knowledge to be integrated into what they already know when they're not able to just simply read something. Certainly we found barriers for people to participate in health and safety meetings. Certainly we found difficulties for people to accurately pass on information to their team and to transfer new health and safety knowledge, and to know when somebody is competent to do a task. So what did we do with that information? So a literacy program started in the 1st of May of this year. There are 2 groups of 5, and the program to date that has been running now is concentrating on people achieving that unit standard 497 so that they can build their core knowledge of health and safety, on communication skills, on active listening skills, and on presentation skills. And I think those quotes on the right-hand side of the slide really say it all. I'm speaking more with others at work, learning new words and understanding better. That's from a 2IC with 10 years experience. I've got more confidence in expressing my views, my thoughts to my fellow workmates. I'm also learning more about health and safety and different meanings to words. What this project is all about is looking to see what types of interventions can make a measurable difference. Certainly my experience has been, and of talking to the people that are on this program at the moment, that the people that are on this program at the moment have a good understanding of safety. But how do we harness that and pass that on to others? That's really at the key to this program. So what's the next steps? This literacy program will run through until mid-September. At that point, we'll reassess the participants at the end of the program. We'll really look to see what have they improved on. How do they rate themselves? How do their colleagues rate themselves? How do they compare to the New Zealand framework for literacy and numeracy? How does management compare them? At the same time, we're about to start a process where we're going to interview 40 horticultural workers from across Auckland and the greater New Zealand sort of area. And what we're going to do is look to see how do they compare with the workers at NZ Hothouse. So we get some sort of baseline data. At the end of the literacy program in mid-September, what we will be doing is generating a return on investment report, looking at the benefits to workers in the horticultural sector by implementing literacy and numeracy initiatives. So please watch this space. Like I say, at the moment, the program is about midway through. I think that it is fair to say that certainly the individuals that are participating in that program are really seeing some gains for themselves. Also, management also acknowledged that they're making some good gains. And so the next step really is to let that program continue, and at the end of the program we'll reassess and really look to see what has made a big difference. So that's it from me. If anyone has any questions, please, I'm more than happy to answer anything that you might have.
There are a couple of questions that have come through, so let's go to the first one. This process seems great, but how could this be used for the low level of literacy for the RSE workers?
So my experience as a workplace literacy tutor tells me that if you're going to raise the literacy skills of your workforce, you have to do it in a very multifaceted way. Certainly intervention is required. An intervention very much like what New Zealand Hothouse KPH are doing at the moment. It has to be very intensive intervention, but at the same time the structures in the workplace need to change. They need to really encourage people to be able to use the skills that they are developing. So the program itself has to be very, very practical, very pragmatic, has to really focus on the skills that people have at the moment and look to see how far do they need to stretch in order to be highly productive in the workplace.
I do encourage you too, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not using the app, there are the microphones if you do want to put forward a question. The other question that we have up on the app is that people discuss various methods to try to make health and safety a personal activity for staff. Have you found any particular approach to give higher engagement than others?
Oh, look, and this is what I spend my workday thinking about, engaging with companies about, and dealing with. Sorry, I was just looking at the lady there. You want me to step further in? Okay. So this is something I certainly think a lot about in terms of my work the work that I do. I think the way that you get staff to engage with health and safety is you make it personal. As you talk about personal stories, that you really acknowledge the success that you're doing. So often health and safety is presented in quite a draconian way, quite a negative way. It's the things that we're doing wrong. But actually, I think we need to move to a point where we acknowledge our successes and that we encourage people to share their stories. Now, that can take some time. If you've got a very diverse workforce with low English-speaking skills, that can be hard work. So it's looking and seeing how else can you do it. I really like what Simon has done with those pictures where he's talked about what are your bottom lines. So again, I think that you can look at doing things that are relevant to your workforce that start at the position where they are starting. But for me, it is all about how do you make it personal? How do you make it so that people are thinking about themselves, they're thinking about their team, and that it's okay to speak up when they think something is not right?
And if I could just add a couple of methods we've used. I mean, obviously, every meeting we have in our organisation, top of the agenda is, are there any health and safety issues that anybody would like to table? That is the very first thing that's discussed every toolbox meeting, every board meeting, every ops meeting. So there's that. But there's also some simple things you can do. Every year we have a safety poster competition. And they have to be hand-drawn, and it's open to staff, it's open to children of staff or grandchildren of staff, and we have cash prizes for first, second and third, and those posters are right throughout our organisation. Every year we get a fresh set. But that's making people think about it and getting them to engage in a fun way. So that's worked really, really well for us. So there's all sorts of things you can do to engage your people.
All right, any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? Certainly there are no more questions through on the app. Anybody want to use the microphones to ask a question of Simon or Glynis? Doesn't look like there's any movement, so Simon, Glynis already has hers. For goodness sake, do not leave without your tractor. Hours of endless entertainment there. Let's give them a big hand, ladies and gentlemen. Simon Watson and Glynis McCarthy.